Next on Newsmax Prime. Yes? No? Maybe so? The House says no to one trade provision, yes to another, leaving the question unsettled and the path ahead uncertain. We'll talk about the curious actions of a House divided. Then, on the international front, solidarity in Paris. The Iranian resistance holds a unity meeting tomorrow, and it will showcase bipartisan opposition to the proposed nuke deal. Howard Dean is one of those in Paris. In addition to Iran, he'll talk about fellow Democrats now pursuing the presidency. And Newsmax Prime starts right now. Good evening and welcome to the Friday edition of Newsmax Prime. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Of prime interest tonight, Iran in the crosshairs. From the pending nuclear deal to their meddling in conflicts throughout the Middle East, the Iranian regime represents a global threat. And now an event has been scheduled in Paris tomorrow that has garnered much support from around the world, including from very influential members of Congress.
I applaud you for expressing solidarity with the Iranian people and for taking a united position against the oppressive regime in Iran. The Iranian regime remains a threat to liberty, a threat to peace, and a threat to stability in the region.
Republican Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen speaking out in support of Iranians in exile who are fighting for a change in Iran. The National Council of Resistance of Iran will hold an event tomorrow in Paris in an act of solidarity against the Iranian regime. Political leaders from around the world, military officials, and former diplomats will be there, making it the world's largest gathering of supporters of freedom and democracy in Iran. For more, we are very pleased to be joined via Skype from Paris by Howard Dean. Governor Dean, the former governor of Vermont and the former chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Governor, it is great to have you with us on Newsmax Prime.
Thanks, JD, for having me on.
Howard, what do you expect to come out of tomorrow's meeting?
Well, I think what we've been trying to focus on, we're really focusing on two things. One, there are 2,400 Iranian dissidents stuck in a prison camp in Iraq. The United States promised to defend those people, and we have not kept our word. So there's one issue. The other issue is the negotiations. I think there are many of us on both sides of the aisle that are very concerned about what's happening in the negotiations. We believe that America has the strong hand, not the weak hand. We think that if you ever gave up the sanctions, it'd be very hard to put them back again. And we're very concerned that what may end up in this deal at the end of the day would still be a significant threat to the United States.
And mindful of that and the bipartisanship of which you speak, Howard, the situation, Republicans and Democrats coming together to say, Mr. President, we have concerns about this nuclear deal. Have you seen any signs, Howard, that the White House is listening to those concerns?
Well, they're going to have to listen eventually because, as you know, the Senate now has an opportunity to vote on the deal within 30 days. Problem is nobody knows what's in the deal. In my own view, I don't see how you make a deal and still leave the Iranians with the capacity to develop nuclear weapons. To have a bargain and get rid of the sanctions simply in return for more notice in case they develop a usable nuclear weapon, it doesn't seem to me to be a terribly good deal for our defense. And again, let me reiterate, I, along with many others, believe that the United States has the upper hand. I just had a friend who was in Iran. The Iranian people very much want to be friends with the United States. They'd like a deal to go forward. So this government, which is the second most repressive on the face of the earth, other than North Korea, is a government that is not in a strong suit, not in a strong place. I don't believe we should be making significant concessions to them.
And perhaps because of those concessions, Howard, an interesting report earlier this week that Israel was behind a computer virus in the hotels used during those negotiations with the Iranians. What is your understanding of that report and any reaction to it?
I know nothing about that. I haven't heard a thing about that, so I couldn't comment.
Well, let's turn now to the situation that is developing. Iran seems to be trying to move into a vacuum in terms of what's going on in Yemen, in terms of what is going on in Iraq. This whole situation involving ISIS, how can there be any trust level with the current regime in Iran?
I think what Iran has done in Yemen is despicable. They've basically uh, they've undermined a stable Arab country. Yemen was a success story. It's the poorest country in the Arab world. It had a stable government. It had a pro-United States government, and because they are next door to Saudi Arabia, the Iranians were playing the game inside the Middle East where they compete with the Saudis. That is not a good thing for them to do. They are still propping up Bashar al-Assad, who was one of the biggest butchers on the face of the earth, who drops barrel bombs full of gas and explosives on his own civilians on a daily basis. The only thing that people in the Middle East, especially these kinds of rogue governments, respect is strength. And I've always preferred to use strength. As you know, I was against the Iraq War, and I still think it was a mistake. But that does not mean I don't believe we ought to use strength and show strength at the negotiating tables, particularly in the Middle East.
Well, you mentioned strength, and of course, the president earlier this week said he was going to send another, 400 plus American troops into Iraq. In your opinion, is that a wise move?
Well, here's the problem that we face. Because we dismantled Iraq when we went in 2003, we now have an Iraq which is in three places. And I personally believe Iraq will never be a real country again. Western Iraq will be controlled by some sort of Sunni group. I don't think it will be ISIS in the end, but we have to stop it from being ISIS. The Kurds will be independent. They'll be our best allies in the region. And the Eastern Iraqis will be dominated by Iran. We set that up. So the Iraqi troops are, they can't be trained. I mean, they've run away at every juncture. I would put more emphasis on training the Kurds. They have a stake in the region. They've been good fighters. I do not think American foreign policy should be based on the idea that we're going to fight for people who won't fight for themselves. And the Iraqis have showed no real interest in fighting ISIS.
With the 30 seconds that remain, Howard, political fights back here at home. As the former chairman of the DNC, taking a look at the presidential candidates in your party, you have Hillary Clinton and you have Bernie Sanders from your home state of Vermont. Have you made a pick in this race, Governor?
I have. I chose Secretary Clinton many months ago because of her experience in foreign policy. So I do believe that she's the right candidate. I think Bernie's going to liven up the debate, especially on the left end of the spectrum, and that's a good thing. But I've chosen to support Hillary.
Now, this is interesting, Howard, because we look back to your own campaign, and you were able to arouse the impassioned left and get some other people supporting you as well. And it's interesting with Bernie because when I went to Capitol Hill, he said, look, I'm a socialist. He would caucus with the Democrats, but it looks like you're arguably building your party with Bernie running for the Democratic nomination. So I'm a little perplexed that you stayed with Secretary Clinton, quite frankly.
Well, I think Hillary Clinton is the most qualified person in America to be president. There's no question. Her experience is extraordinary. I think foreign policy is going to be an issue, not so much in the election, but for the next 4 to 8 years. As we've been talking about, there's some big minefields in the Middle East, and I think we need somebody who knows the territory, and she does.
Howard, there was this Washington knows best feeling when you became chairman of the Democratic National Committee, when you said you were going to establish an active presence in all 50 states. I think in retrospect, that worked pretty well for the Democratic Party. Is there any advice you have for the party today heading into this big election in 2016?
Well, Hillary's actually already said that she's going to have a campaign apparatus in all 50 states. I don't think we're going to have the same apparatus in Utah that we will say in Virginia, but I think it's important. Here's why, JD, I think it's important for both parties to be active. I think it's important for the Republicans to be active in places like New York as well. You need to be president of the whole country. And I always believed when I was running that it was a sign of respect to ask people for their votes, even if you knew they weren't going to vote for you. And the reason for that is it makes it easier to govern afterwards. I think we've got to do a little more respecting of both sides when we can. And I've certainly said things that probably would have been better if I hadn't. But I do think that the right and the left, or the Democrats and the Republicans, whatever you want to call us, need to be a little more respectful of the point of view on the other side. I'm doing my best to do that. I don't succeed every day, but I think it'd be better for the country if we all did.
And on that point, Howard, we agree. Governor Howard Dean joining us from Paris. Sir, we thank you for your time.
Thanks very much.
And there's more straight ahead as Newsmax Prime continues.